Hi gang, with the Imperium beset on all sides, one common question within the Inquisition, those agents dedicated to protecting it from enemies within, is, well, what's the best way to do that? An Amalathian might argue that it's by upholding imperial institutions, whereas a recongregator might say that those institutions need constant reform. A Thorian might seek signs of the return of the God Emperor, whereas a Xanthite might merely seek the darkest knowledge he can find. There are as many philosophies within the Inquisition as there are Inquisitors. So in this video, let's go through all of the main ones. Look everyone, it's a magic space frog, the real originators of 40k. Details of how to get that and more at the end of the video. The forces of the Inquisition can be a fractious group. The agents of the most holy orders of the Emperor's Inquisition are highly independent, each of them free to pursue the security of the Imperium in their own way, whether hunting down rogue cults on overpopulated hive worlds, to leading vast armies in the eradication of a Xenos threat, their only oversight being the watchful eye of their own peers. Of course, over the millennia of its existence, this has led to there being a number of different schools of thought within the Inquisition on the best way to actually protect the Imperium. What is the most pressing threat, or the most promising path forward? An Inquisitor only has limited time available to them. How should they spend it? Where should they focus their efforts? There are as many different opinions on this as there are Inquisitors, and the correct way to prosecute the defense of mankind can be a common topic of conversation or conflict in inquisitorial conclaves. But sometimes, some schools of thought become so popular that they become broad divisions by which the entire organization can be sorted. One example of this is the Ordos, the three Ordos Majoris of the Inquisition, the Ordo Malleus, Hereticus, and Xenos, are groupings of Inquisitors who've pledged their lives to fighting against one of the main threats to the Imperium, the demon, heretic, or alien. And those are so powerful that they are organized institutions with their own Lord Inquisitors and conclaves spread across the galaxy, even their own specialized militant chambers from where their Inquisitors can draw armed forces. And of course, there are even smaller Ordos Minoris that concentrate on more specialized threats to the Imperium, like the Ordo Kronos, who investigate time-based anomalies, or the Ordo Redactus, who seek to keep the origins of the Inquisition safe. But running alongside all those formal divisions is the well-known divide between the Puritan and the Radical. Puritans are Inquisitors who generally believe in the base tenets of the Imperial faith, as handed down to its citizens. Heretics and those who question the Emperor are evil and morally corrupt. Any truck with them is corrupting by association. Xenos are horrific and unholy and should be purged. Corruption and witchery should be rooted out and brought to light. You know, that sort of thing. And then by comparison, Radicals are those who've developed a looser relationship with the tenets of imperial faith, often by long exposure to the truth of the galaxy. Radicals might favour shake-ups in the status quo, investigate Xenos or heretic artifacts in order to see if they hold any benefit for humanity, or seek to use the weapons of the enemy against them. An Inquisitor might veer between those two sides over the course of their careers, starting out young and full of imperial zeal with no tolerance for those who deviate from it, before slowly, as their investigations continue and they learn more of the galaxy, becoming enamored with some grand scheme or promising find that might help them save humanity if only they have the courage to grasp it. And of course, that can be a dangerous road. If Radicals have a tendency towards arrogance, Puritans are wont to see all Radicals as hopelessly corrupted heretics, and wars within the Inquisition have been fought many times between adherents of those two sides. But in reality, even those two sides are too simplistic. For within the broad lines of Puritan and Radical lie a number of different factions and philosophies, some millennia old and some only transient, specific to a particular sector or period of time. Some of these factions are huge and well documented, akin to common beliefs and schools of thought within the Imperium at large, things that might be considered common sense on many Imperial worlds, and others a little more than deluded sects with their own fringe ideas about the nature of of the universe, or have even delved so far into forbidden knowledge that membership of them is now considered gravely heretical in most conclaves. The most popular of these are probably those that cleave closest to the general beliefs of the Imperium, the large, well-known factions that can broadly be termed Puritan. And it's here we can start. The Puritans comprise some of the largest factions within the Inquisition, many of which have roots millennia old and whose beliefs are mostly considered unsurprising within the halls of imperial governance across the galaxy. They're dominated by three large and powerful factions, and then there are a number of sub-factions that are offshoots of those larger ones, often versions of the larger factions but with a more specialist focus. Puritan factions rarely have any need to be secretive, and the three big ones would be very recognizable to any Inquisitor in the Imperium. In the current setting, the largest faction within the Inquisition by far is the Puritan faction known as the Amalathians. This faction traces its name to a great event at the start of the 41st millennium, but in reality, this was really just a new label for a belief system that was already very common and can be argued to be the closest to the original stated goals of the Inquisition itself. Amalathians take their name from the great conclave on Mount Amalath on the imperial shrine world of Gathalamor. For a brief period at the dawn of the 41st millennium, it felt like the Imperium was regaining its strength, and the conclave drew a great procession of imperial military might. Lord generals, political and religious leaders, even hundreds of Space Marine chapter masters gathered to renew their oaths to the Imperium in a great ceremony, and many of those in attendance were filled with hope and a spirit of great unity. A general mood grew in the Inquisition, at least in the Inquisitors that attended, that the Imperium was once again proceeding the way the Emperor intended, and a number of Inquisitors started to name their beliefs after that conclave. Amalathians believe that the organizations, systems, and practices of the Imperium are fundamentally good and ordained by the Emperor himself, all part of his plan for humanity. Yes, there might be friction, there might be squabbles between agencies, but fundamentally the Imperium is working as the Emperor intended, and the goal of the Inquisition should be to foster that and prevent anything that might destabilize it. Amalathians strive to maintain the status quo. Their missions are less concerned with traditional crimes like mutation and witchery, or fantastic goals involving the metaphysics of reality, but are more street level. They concern themselves with tracking down cults, recidivists, political rivalries, or criminal enterprises that might see imperial rule threatened or reduced on either a galactic scale or a very, very local one. The institutions of the Imperium are considered divinely ordained, and their function must be protected. Any change to them, any political upheaval or radical new idea is to be considered a threat, whether that threat is underworld criminality, making imperial processes less efficient, or political unrest or religious sedition. Amalathian Inquisitors tend to work slowly and relatively quietly, often cooperating with other branches of the Imperium or seeking to foster better relations between them. They have great respect for the Imperium's authorities, and so they're less likely to flaunt their rank or their seal, more likely to quietly entreat aid from those organizations than, say, bulldoze through them, waving their seal around and demanding the requisition of vast armies. In fact, Amalathian Inquisitors tend to take a very poor view of those Inquisitors who claim to know the Emperor's will like that. They see them as arrogant and very destabilizing. For them, nobody can know the Emperor's thoughts. They can merely seek to uphold his institutions as he intended and to prevent anything from happening to them. Amalathians do not often sit in judgment. They recognize that those with power in the Imperium have a considerable amount of leeway to act on their own beliefs and protect their own positions, and they're only likely to step in if an individual's actions starts to threaten the operation of other imperial branches. A high-ranking adept feathering their nest isn't really that much of a problem. A high-ranking noble feathering their nest in a way that affects efficiency is. Our second philosophy, though, is very different. Monodominants are in many ways the opposite extreme. In fact, monodominants are very much the Imperium and Puritanism taken to extremes. To a monodominant, the Imperium is fighting a war for racial survival, Yeah, and anything that might have a chance of threatening that should be ruthlessly crushed. The only way that humanity can guarantee the realization of the Emperor's vision is if every other species, any deviation from glorious humanity in the galaxy, is killed. Monodominants are incredibly intolerant of any wayward behavior. Xenos, mutants, abhumans, psychers, any deviation at all is considered heresy, and there's absolutely no excuse for heresy, for contemplating heresy, or for abetting heretics. And furthermore, if they can kill enough of those heretics, then natural selection will prevail and mankind will come to dominate the galaxy. They are the bigotry of the Imperium turned up to 11. This credo, known as Monodomination, was originally developed in M33 by Inquisitor Goldo, an ancient Inquisitor moving into retirement, and at the time, it was almost immediately sidelined as a devout but maybe very old Inquisitor giving into pessimism in his old age. However, centuries later, the philosophy saw this strange revival under Inquisitor Germinius of Pilusia, and ever since then, they have been a vocal minority belief amongst Puritan Inquisitors. Monodominants are often younger and a lot more hot-headed than other Inquisitors, their belief in the teachings of their faction completely unshakable despite any evidence to the contrary. Their bombastic creed leads them to act very openly. In fact, monodominants often cultivate a sort of cult of personality around them to inspire terror in their foes. Monodominant inquisitors might eschew subtlety and subterfuge and instead arrive on a suspected world with a large and imposing fleet, thousands of followers broadcasting the suspected heresy of the inhabitants until the fearful citizenry rise up in a frenzy of violence directed against anyone the Inquisitor might see as less than human. Monodominants are rarely shy about requisitioning the forces of the Imperium for their own ends, including violent fringe religious sects like the Redemptionists. They're uncaring of any misguided violence enacted in their name, as long as it serves their wider purposes, and are by far the most likely to use exterminatus on guilty planets. In fact, in their eyes, any Inquisitor who would not do the same, or has the temerity to suggest that the actions of monodominants might do more harm than good, is little better than a heretic themselves, and monodominant Inquisitors are regularly involved in feuds with their brethren. The third of the large Puritan factions are a little different, and like the Amalathians, though they derive their name from a recent event, their beliefs stretch back to the founding of the Inquisition itself. Thorians take their name from the Age of Apostasy, when the tyrant Goj Vandire, who had risen to become the de facto ruler of the Imperium, was overthrown by a preacher named Sebastian Thor, who united many different organizations within the Imperium on a crusade of light headed directly to Terra and deposed the High Lord. To the Thorians, Sebastian Thor was just one example of a person moving with the spirit of the Emperor, guided by his divine will. To Thorians, the Emperor has ascended the mortal realm, the body on the Golden Throne merely earthly remains, and he influences the world by investing individuals with a portion of his power. Sebastian Thor, the living saints, various inspirational leaders and preachers over the millennia have all been what they call divine avatars, mortals invested with the power of the Emperor, and the job of them as Inquisitors is not only to seek those people out, but also to protect and aid them in doing the Emperor's work. Furthermore, many Thorians believe that if people can still be invested with a portion of the Emperor's divine will, then the next step would be the reincarnation of the Emperor entirely, if only the correct prayers are spoken and a host strong enough is found. A belief called resurrectionism. As such, Thorians tend to spend their time on the study and development of warp technology, or in the research of religious texts that might uncover ways in which to manifest the Emperor's spirit more effectively. There are numerous of them amongst the Ordo Malleus, where knowledge of the warp is concentrated. They're also quite active in the Ordo Hereticus, and they maintain good ties with the Ministorum, allowing them to follow the trails led by the saints of the past. While Thorianism is considered a Puritan faction in the 41st millennium, it should be obvious that attempting to resurrect the divine spirit of the Emperor is a controversial view amongst the Inquisition. Thorians are merely one expression of two much older traditions, those of incarnationism and resurrectionism. And resurrectionism in particular has a long, complex, and very divisive history within the Inquisition. Two of the four founders of the Inquisition were resurrectionists. In the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy, they were mostly concerned with finding a way to bring back the Emperor, and their beliefs and the beliefs of resurrectionist factions that came after them have led to numerous wars within the Inquisition and to inquisitors taking steps down very dark paths indeed. There are a number of resurrectionist radical factions. The Thorians, of course, claim that humanity needs the Emperor more than ever, and that their mission is for the good of all humanity, even as their opponents worry about the political ramifications of bringing an avatar of the Emperor back into existence 10,000 years later. However, mostly Thorians are considered part of the Puritan creed. Also, given its great age, resurrectionism has resulted in a number of smaller splinter groups over the years that are still generally grouped as Puritan. The Anomalian Beholders are on the more conservative end of this. They find the idea of creating the Emperor's divine avatar to be close to hubris, and instead they concentrate on traveling the galaxy for signs of existing divine avatars, observing and studying them, and potentially aiding them if needed. They're some of the most well-traveled inquisitors in the Imperium, tending towards a practical and sensible mindset, their work considered to be a necessary step in preparing the galaxy for what they feel must be a naturally occurring rebirth of the Emperor. It's not something you can force. Also, in the smaller factions, Ardentites are an offshoot of the Thorian belief system, but they don't identify either as incarnationist or as resurrectionist. Instead of believing in specific divine avatars, the Ardentites counter that the Emperor is likely to manifest in humanity as a whole, perhaps by shepherding its psychic evolution or improving the talents of its leaders over time. The Emperor is certainly present, but he works through the whole of humanity, not through special saints. Ardentites are known as eccentric but thorough investigators, dedicated to uncovering evidence of the Emperor's hand moving unseen through the galaxy. Though, because of their constant search for proof of these theories, they're also derisively known as miracle chasers by some other inquisitors. These factions can be very specific. Casophilians are a great example. The Casophilians concentrate on the story of Saint Casophili, who was killed by the dark forces of chaos before miraculously rising from the dead days later, with stories of this sea of sound and colour they experienced while dead. Casophilians are resurrectionists who concentrate on that truth, that there might exist a place where a soul can reside intact within the warp, and therefore there might be a way of bringing them back intact from the Sea of Souls. Seeing themselves as researchers and openly embracing new theories, the Casophilians are frequently skilled demonologists, given their long study of how entities might cross the veil. And then the Revivicators refine that even further, touching on the extremer ends of Puritan philosophy, possibly even touching on radicalism. Revivicators study the soul at the point of death to see if it would be possible to transfer it elsewhere instead of to the warp, with the ultimate goal of freeing the Emperor from the Golden Throne. Because of this, the Revivicators have a great interest in the technology of the Eldar and their ability to save souls from the warp by transferring them into spirit stones, which obviously pushes the boundaries of what you could call Puritanism. All of these factions are finer and finer delineations of some of the most common belief systems in the Imperium, those that define Puritanism. The belief that the Emperor's institutions are just and right is essentially the Amalathian, that the alien, heretic, and witch are to be abhorred is essentially the Monodominant, and that the spirit of the divine Emperor watches over them and moves with all things is fundamentally the Thorians and a lot of the fringe sects. It's only as inquisitors investigate further and further that they end up with such a specific set of beliefs as, say, Casophilians. Puritans are the bedrock of the Inquisition, the ones who can call most reliably on its armies, and tend to receive the most widespread support from their fellow inquisitors and their local conclaves. While many Puritan actions occur in the shadows as their agents track down threats to Imperial safety, Puritans rarely need to conceal their methods. Backed up by the beliefs of the vast majority of the Imperium, they can act openly, and many Puritan Inquisitors are justly famed by the end of their lives, retiring with a great legacy of countering the enemies of the Imperium, purging recidivists from its worlds, and bringing the guilty to justice by methods subtle or extreme. Puritans are the dominant and most visible and famed force within the holy ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition. However, the career of an Inquisitor is usually long and complicated, and it involves exposure to the truths of the universe few other human minds would be able to withstand. And while the Puritans might react to this by armouring their wills and closing their minds like a fortress, plenty of Inquisitors move closer as they age to the path of the radical, the belief that by studying the tools of their enemies, mankind might discover its salvation. And we'll go through their factions, and there are a lot of them, in the next video. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to hear more about the Inquisition and other factions of 40k, there should be a video popping up there on the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, well, you can like and subscribe, but you can also go and follow our second channel, where our community videos like Book Club and Tale of Four Gamers and various other things will be posted, or go to the Ardentities store and buy some merch. See ya!